Just before dawn in Texas, when the highways were empty enough that every distant engine echoed, a place most drivers passed without noticing was already being sealed off. From the air, the logistics district looked exactly the way it was supposed to look. Rectangular warehouses, clean access roads, long rows of trailers backed into loading bays like parked animals waiting for daylight. No graffiti, no broken fences, no obvious signs of neglect. The kind of place that exists to move things efficiently and asks no questions while doing it. On the ground, the illusion held right up until it didn't. There were no sirens, no flashing lights, no shouted commands. Unmarked vehicles rolled in along service roads designed for utility crews and late-night freight. Headlights went dark a block out, doors opened softly, boots hit pavement with controlled timing. FBI and ICE teams moved together, deliberately mixed, so no single unit carried the full picture of what was about to happen. This was not an arrest operation, it was a containment maneuver. At the same minute, on opposite sides of the complex, identical movements unfolded. Access points closed. Exits were quietly blocked. Communication stayed minimal. This wasn't about speed. It was about preventing motion before anyone inside realized they needed it. The first breach didn't come through a smashed gate or a blown door. It came through a standard loading entrance with a valid access code. No forced entry, no alarms. The system accepted them. Inside, the air told the truth faster than anything else. It didn't smell like cardboard and diesel. It smelled processed, sterile, chemical, but clean. The kind of scent that lingers when surfaces are wiped down too often and ventilation runs even when no one is supposed to be there. Lights flicked on in sequence as teams advanced. Not chaotic illumination, but zones, each space revealing itself deliberately. This wasn't a storage warehouse stacked with random freight. It was organized, too organized. Within minutes, agents understood they were standing inside a facility that had been built to operate quietly and continuously. Pallets were staged in precise lanes. Packaging materials were separated by function. Nothing sat idle. Everything pointed in one direction, toward movement. Then they found the first line. Long stainless tables lined with press molds. Trays stacked floor to ceiling, each holding tablets identical in size, color, and imprint to legitimate prescription medication. Millions of pills, already sealed, already boxed, already labeled for transport. No handwritten notes, no improvisation, just volume and consistency. This wasn't production ramping up. This was output ready to leave. Further inside, reinforced containers wrapped in industrial plastic sat under false shipping codes. When one was opened, the scale hit hard. Compressed bricks of methamphetamine, packaged like commercial goods. Nearby, smaller containers held something far more dangerous. Fentanyl, pure enough that exposure protocols slowed every movement in the room. Masks stayed sealed. Gloves were checked again. In spaces like this, danger doesn't announce itself. It waits. The deeper teams moved, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't a stash meant to hide. It was a hub meant to function. Drugs flowed in one direction. Packaging flowed in another. Finished product exited through loading bays positioned to allow rapid transfer without disrupting normal freight traffic. Surveillance cameras watched everything, but they blended seamlessly into what looked like standard warehouse security. From the outside, nothing about this place invited inspection. It didn't look suspicious because it didn't need to. It looked legitimate. That was the point. By the time the first counts came back, even veteran agents stopped guessing. The numbers were too large. Millions of pills, tons of narcotics, enough volume to supply multiple regions without interruption. This wasn't feeding a city, it was feeding the country. And that was the moment the operation shifted in tone. Not because of resistance, there was none, but because of realization. A warehouse like this doesn't exist on instinct or violence alone. It exists because someone designed it to live inside the system without triggering alarms. As evidence teams worked methodically, one question hung heavier than the drugs themselves. If this facility had been operating here, in plain sight, for this long, how many others were already doing the same thing, hidden behind ordinary walls, moving through the same highways Americans drove every day without noticing anything at all? By the time the outer perimeter was fully secured, the operation had already moved past shock and into method. This phase wasn't loud. It wasn't fast. It was careful. SWAT elements held position while evidence teams advanced in sealed gear, every movement calculated to avoid stirring the air itself. In facilities like this, fentanyl changes the rules. A careless step, a dragged boot, a box opened the wrong way can turn a routine search into a medical emergency in seconds. Speed meant nothing here. Precision was survival. The warehouse revealed itself in layers. What looked like a single open floor was actually segmented by function. One zone dedicated entirely to pill pressing, industrial-grade machines, calibrated, maintained, logged. Another reserved for packaging, where counterfeit prescription labels were applied with such accuracy they could pass pharmacy-level inspection. Serial numbers rotated in batches. Expiration dates were staggered. The product wasn't just illegal, it was professional. Further in, the temperature dropped. Refrigerated sections held sealed pallets marked as nutritional supplements and medical supplies. The manifests matched, the weights didn't. Inside were additional narcotics staged for long-haul movement, insulated not just from heat, but from detection. Every detail suggested the operators understood enforcement thresholds better than most inspectors did. Weapons were present, but they weren't the focus. Rifles and sidearms were stored near access points, not scattered. Defensive, not expressive. This wasn't a gang preparing for a shootout. It was an organization protecting uptime. Cash appeared last, not loose, not chaotic. Bundled, wrapped, and stored in compartments built into walls and floors. Operating capital, not profits waiting to be laundered. Money meant to keep things moving when routes shifted or shipments stalled. What unsettled agents most wasn't the volume, it was the calm. There were no signs of panic. No half-packed crates, no abandoned tools. The facility had been running smoothly right up until the moment the doors opened. Whoever managed this place believed, correctly, until now, that it was invisible. Outside the warehouse, analysts had already begun connecting dots. For months, warning signs had been appearing far from the border. Hospitals reporting overdose clusters that didn't align with known trafficking patterns. Seizures deep inside the country with no obvious entry trail. Drugs weren't slipping through cracks anymore. They were arriving already organized, already packaged, already distributed. Texas stood out for a reason. Its highways connect ports, rail yards, and inland distribution corridors that feed dozens of states within hours. Control one hub, and geography stops mattering. From a cartel perspective, that kind of leverage eliminates border risk entirely. This warehouse wasn't a shortcut. It was a replacement. As shipping data was overlaid with seizure reports, patterns sharpened. Rental trucks traced back to the same storage contracts. Shell companies registered in multiple states shared overlapping directors. Power usage at inactive warehouses spiked overnight. Security systems logged movement when nothing was supposed to be happening. This wasn't concealment. It was camouflage. Inspecting every logistics facility would paralyze legitimate commerce. And the people behind this operation understood that balance perfectly. They hid not by being small, but by being ordinary. By mid-morning, it was clear the raid had done more than seize drugs. It had exposed a control point, a place where losses were absorbed, routes adjusted, and supply stabilized when other nodes failed. A lab can be rebuilt, a shipment can be replaced, but a logistics hub like this, once compromised, forces the entire system to react. And as evidence stacked higher and counts continued climbing, one realization settled in across every team involved. This wasn't the end of something. It was the moment the rest of the network realized it might have to fight to survive. By the time the first phase of physical searches slowed, the operation had already shifted somewhere else. Upstairs, in a windowless office built to look like administrative overflow, the real nervous system of the facility was still warm. Laptops sat closed but powered. Server racks hummed quietly behind drywall panels, painted the same industrial gray as the rest of the warehouse. No logos, no labels, no reason for anyone doing a routine inspection to ask why a logistics site needed this much computing power. The cyber teams didn't rush. They didn't have to. This system wasn't built by amateurs who panic when the door gets kicked in. It was designed to survive attention. Drives were imaged live. Memory states frozen before encryption cycles could rotate. Every second mattered, not because data would vanish, but because the network was still alive elsewhere. When the first dashboards resolved, the room went silent. This wasn't inventory tracking, it was orchestration. Routes pulsed across a multi-state map, updating in near real time. Not fixed paths, but probabilities. If traffic slowed here, flow shifted there. If an inspection appeared on one highway, loads dissolved into secondary routes before officers even arrived. Drivers never saw the full picture. They received instructions in fragments, one leg at a time. No single arrest could expose the system. This wasn't reaction, it was anticipation. One module tracked enforcement behavior, patrol density, inspection frequency, historical stop data. When pressure increased in one corridor, the algorithm didn't resist it. It avoided it. Shipments rerouted minutes before scrutiny arrived, leaving nothing behind but empty pavement and clean paperwork. Another layer revealed something worse. Small unmanned aircraft, not for delivery, for observation. Drones launched from unremarkable locations, storage yards, industrial rooftops, leased farmland. They watched transfer points, monitored law enforcement movement, and when tracked, terminated themselves mid-flight. No recovery, no hardware, no trail. The goal wasn't speed or intimidation, it was denial. The deeper analysts went, the clearer the design became. This network didn't rely on violence to protect itself. Violence attracts attention. It relied on data, on automation, on complexity layered just deep enough that no single agency could see the whole shape without coordination. And then, a name surfaced, not shouted, not dramatic, just repeated quietly across files that didn't need to explain it. This wasn't a street boss or a public cartel figure. There were no videos, no threats, no intercepted calls full of bravado. The individual behind the architecture never moved product, never touched cash, never appeared in seizure photos. He designed systems. Financial records tied to shell logistics firms painted the outline. Companies registered across multiple states, each handling a narrow function: freight coordination, storage contracts, fleet services. Individually boring, collectively lethal. Money moved through them cleanly, fragmented into transactions small enough to avoid scrutiny and frequent enough to sustain operations indefinitely. This explained how the warehouse had survived untouched. No intimidation campaigns, no bribes that left trails. Protection came from dispersion, from redundancy, from the fact that nothing looked important on its own. Losses were variables, not failures. If a shipment vanished, another route compensated. If a facility went dark, others absorbed the load. The system didn't collapse under pressure, it flexed, until now. As federal agencies shared intelligence in real time, synchronized interdictions began elsewhere. Not announced, not televised, just quiet stops on highways. Inspections that suddenly lasted too long. Warehouses that didn't reopen after lunch. The network hesitated. Internal messages recovered later showed confusion. Automated reroutes began overlapping. Backup corridors collided with each other. Redundancy turned into congestion. What had once flowed smoothly began to stiffen. This was the risk the architects had tried to avoid. Systems built for efficiency struggle under simultaneous disruption. And for the first time, the network was facing pressure everywhere at once. By early afternoon, analysts understood the implications. This wasn't just a drug case. It was a privately controlled logistics network operating faster and more flexibly than many legal supply chains inside the United States. It exploited the same infrastructure that kept the economy running: highways, data, automation, and it did so without breaking rules loudly enough to be noticed. That realization changed the classification of the operation. This wasn't only about narcotics anymore, it was about control. And somewhere beyond the walls of the Texas warehouse, the person who had designed this system was watching the same data, seeing the same failures, and realizing that for the first time, the machine he trusted might not outrun what was closing in. By the time the network realized it was losing coherence, there was nowhere left to redirect the pressure. For years, the system had survived because it never faced everything at once. One inspection here, one seizure there. A route closed, another opened. Losses absorbed quietly. That logic failed the moment disruption became simultaneous. Across Texas and beyond it, vehicles began stopping, not because they were flagged, but because their assumptions broke. Drivers hesitated, schedules slipped by minutes, handoffs missed their windows. In systems built on precision, hesitation is visible. Stops followed behavior, not warrants. On highways, units intercepted convoys where routes bent just slightly away from habit. At distribution yards, inspectors arrived after manifests updated but before cargo moved. In transfer zones that had never seen enforcement, gates stayed closed a little too long. The network tried to compensate. It always had. This time, compensation collided with itself. Backup routes overlapped. Secondary hubs filled faster than they were designed to. Automated rerouting created congestion where there had never been any. What was meant to be invisible became loud through inefficiency alone. Inside federal command centers, maps began to change character. Not expanding, but collapsing, lines thinned, nodes dimmed. Corridors that had pulsed with movement hours earlier went quiet. That silence wasn't relief. It was failure. As the last seizures were logged, the numbers stopped being abstract. Millions of counterfeit pills packaged to mimic legitimate medicine. Tons of methamphetamine and fentanyl staged for inland distribution. Cash counted not as profit, but as operating capital that would never circulate again. But the most important confirmation didn't come from weight or value. It came from absence. Dashboards froze. Schedules stopped refreshing. Systems that had updated every 60 seconds for years now sat on old timestamps. The network didn't panic. It didn't self-destruct. It simply ran out of options. Late that night, federal units moved on a final objective. Not a warehouse, not a highway. A residence selected for distance, not defense. No spectacle, no press. The perimeter closed before the lights inside changed. When agents entered, there was no resistance. The architect had built distance between himself and risk for a long time. Layers of intermediaries, contracts, automation. He had trusted that insulation more than walls or weapons. Distance failed when the system that created it stopped responding. The arrest was brief, procedural. A man removed from the environment he had designed to operate without him. For the first time, he stood alone, separated from the machinery that had once absorbed every consequence on his behalf. Data recovered afterward confirmed what investigators already suspected. This was not a single operation. It was a model, one that could be copied, scaled, and rebuilt if conditions allowed it. And that was the final lesson. The warehouse in Texas was real. The drugs were real. The arrests were real. But those were symptoms. The deeper threat was structural. Criminal networks no longer rely on chaos. They rely on efficiency. They hide inside systems meant to move goods, money, and data at speed. They survive not by breaking rules loudly, but by following them quietly, just well enough to avoid attention. This operation worked because it didn't chase shipments one by one. It targeted infrastructure, timing, coordination. The places where control actually lives. When it ended, the highways didn't change. The warehouses still stood. The economy kept moving, but something underneath it had been removed, and the final assessment, circulated quietly after the last reports were filed, was colder than any headline. This wasn't just a cartel problem. It wasn't just a drug problem. It was a systems problem. Because when criminal power learns to move faster than oversight, the fight isn't only about force. It's about whether the structures we trust can tell the difference between what belongs there and what's been using them all along.